In 1913, a man sat behind the wheel of a rattling machine, facing 3,000 miles of dirt, danger, and silence. No roads, no signs, just a dream to build something no one had dared before. A road across America, from New York to San Francisco. But what started as a journey for glory turned into something else. The car would break down, bridges would vanish, shadows would follow them across the mountains, and in one lonely forest, something waited that history never wrote down. Not everyone would make it to the end. Welcome to a new story from Historia Unseen. I'm John, the voiceover artist for this channel, and today, you're about to witness the wild, untold journey. Before Route 66 even existed, it was just a car on a road that didn't exist. A man behind the wheel, staring at 3,000 miles of mud, rivers, forests, and empty land. No highways, no maps, and no guarantee they'd survive the journey. But if they made it, they'd build the first road across America. Before Route 66, before gas stations and motels, there was only this story. A wild plan, a team of dreamers, and the birth of a nation on wheels. And one secret hidden deep in the journey that history never told you. The sky was heavy over New York City in the summer of 1913. Horns echoed through the streets. Horses shared the road with machines. Gasoline smelled like fire, and most Americans had never left their hometown. But one man stood at the edge of the Hudson River, his hand on the hood of his open-top motor car, and his eyes locked west toward San Francisco. His name was Henry Osterman, and he wasn't a soldier or a rich man. He was a dreamer, a man who believed that America needed a spine, a road that connected sea to sea. Most people laughed at him. "You can't drive across the country," they said. "There are no roads. There are no signs. You'll get stuck, lost, or worse." But Henry didn't listen. A few months earlier, he had received a strange letter. It was stamped with the words, "The Lincoln Highway Association." Inside was a simple line, "We are building the first highway across America. Do you want to help?" Henry didn't even think twice. He packed his tools, fixed his car, and promised to drive every single mile. His mission was simple: find the path, make a report, and show the world it could be done. But what waited beyond New York wasn't a path. It was a nightmare. Just hours after leaving the city, the road turned to mud, and when it rained, it turned to glue. People in small towns stared as his car limped in tires, coated in dirt, engine coughing like an old man. He asked for gas, and they said, "What's that?" He asked for maps, and they gave him church drawings and farmer sketches. Still, he kept driving, day after day, town after town, mud after mud. In Pennsylvania, a wheel broke in the middle of a thunderstorm. He had to use fence wood and rope just to roll downhill. In Ohio, a farmer's bull blocked the path for hours. Henry sat on his car hood, playing harmonica, waiting for the beast to move. But in all this struggle, something amazing was happening. People began to talk. "Did you see the man in the motor car? He says he's making a road across the country." "No way. That's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was happening, right in front of them. Kids ran out to wave. Families brought water and food. Blacksmiths offered tools. Mechanics, who barely knew cars, tried to help. Henry began to write in his notebook, "America wants this road, even if they don't know it yet." The path was not easy, and he was only in Indiana. Still, every broken bridge, every flat tire, every cold night sleeping under the stars, it all meant something bigger. This wasn't just a road. This was the start of something powerful, the beginning of movement, of freedom, of people leaving small towns and reaching new places, the birth of a nation that wasn't stuck, but rolling forward. Henry looked west again, dust in his eyes, and said to no one in particular, "They'll thank us one day, when they're driving across this land, and don't even realize we built it with blood and bolts." And so he drove on, toward what history would one day call the Lincoln Highway. The wheels kept turning, but the road was starting to disappear. After Indiana, the car rattled into Illinois, battered, noisy, but still alive. Henry sat behind the wheel, shoulders stiff, eyes burning from wind and dust. The sky was turning red. The land was flat, but something in the air felt off. He looked down at the map, hand-drawn lines, pencil trails, and guesses. And then the map just ended. There was no road ahead, just dirt, tall grass, and a river that didn't belong there. That can't be right. There's supposed to be a bridge. But there wasn't. The Spoon River was swollen from last week's storm. And the bridge? Gone. Washed away. Nothing left but broken wood and twisted nails sticking from the banks. Henry stepped out. Mud sucked at his boots. He looked across the water. It wasn't wide, but deep and fast. The crew behind him, 2 men and a mechanic, stood silent. The youngest one, Caleb, scratched his neck. "What now, boss?" "We turned back." Henry didn't answer. He just stared at the river like it had insulted him. "We don't turn back," he said. "We build forward." They walked into the nearby town, a small patch of homes and one saloon. Henry stood in the middle of the main street and shouted, "We need ropes, wood, nails, and help." People looked confused. Some laughed. But then one man stepped forward, a carpenter. Then another, a farmer with a wagon. And then 2 teenage boys carrying a saw and big grins. They weren't just helping Henry. They were helping the future. By nightfall, torches lit the riverbank. A wooden raft took shape, clumsy but strong. The car was rolled back, its wheels tied to the frame with rope. Everyone watched, holding their breath, as it was pushed onto the raft. The river was quiet for a moment. Then the raft began to drift. Left, right. One loud crack echoed as a board snapped, but held. Caleb stood in the water waist deep, guiding it with a long stick. The other man, Jennings, prayed under his breath. The raft scraped the far side, tipped slightly, and landed. Cheers exploded from both sides. The car was safe. They had crossed the river. "This isn't just a test drive anymore," Henry said, wiping sweat from his face. "This is the war before the war, the fight to unite everything." The next morning, the town gave them apples and coffee. The carpenter gave them a hammer and said, "Wherever this road ends, tell them we were part of it." Henry smiled and nodded. They drove on, through the edge of Iowa now, the land rolling like waves, the sun bright and hot. Birds scattered ahead of the car like they'd never seen a machine before. But the road was getting worse. In some places, it turned into wagon ruts filled with water. In others, it vanished completely. Sometimes Henry just followed fence lines. Other times, he followed stars. The towns grew smaller. Fuel got harder to find. In one town, they had to trade tools for gasoline, glass jars filled by hand. But every mile mattered. Every broken axle, every torn boot, every handshake from a stranger on a front porch. It meant progress. At one stop, a schoolteacher asked Henry what he was doing. He pointed to the horizon and said, "We're not just building a road. We're building belief that this land can be crossed. And if we can cross it, we can connect it." That night, they slept under the stars again. Jennings played a slow tune on the harmonica. Caleb scribbled notes into a small book. And Henry, he stared at the moon, wondering what kind of country this would become, when people could go anywhere, anytime. But as the wind picked up, so did the sound. A faint grinding noise in the distance, like wheels, but too fast for a wagon, too rough for a train, and no lights. Henry sat up. "Did you hear that?" They listened. The sound stopped. Nothing but the wind again and rustling trees. But deep in the shadows, something was watching. The wind had gone quiet, but the feeling hadn't. Henry didn't sleep that night. Not after the sound they'd heard. That grinding noise in the dark, with no wagon, no lights, no explanation. But by morning, the sky was clear, and the road ahead was calling. They packed up the car, boots muddy, arms sore, and drove west. Iowa slipped behind them. The flatlands of Nebraska stretched out like a giant field of yellow. There were no fences now, no houses for miles, only dry grass, rolling dirt, and the long shadow of their own dust. "Feels like we're driving into the sky," Jennings said, staring out across the horizon. Henry nodded, but stayed quiet. He was watching the side mirror, hoping he wouldn't hear that sound again. The further west they drove, the more the road stopped being a road. It turned into dust trails left by wagons, some deep enough to swallow a shoe, others just powder that blew into their eyes. The sun grew hotter. The engine hissed. Caleb coughed and tied a rag around his mouth. "What is this?" he asked. "A desert." "No," Henry said, scanning the flat land. "It's just a part of the country no one dared to pave." For the next 3 days, they didn't see a single town. Only old barns, some falling over, and trains far in the distance, never close enough to wave down. Food was low, water was warm, and the car was struggling. Dust filled the air filter, sand ground against the gears, and when they stopped to cool the engine, the heat still burned through their boots. But they pushed on. Every few miles, Henry stuck a wooden stake into the ground, marking the way for others. He kept drawing in his notebook, small maps, dirt routes, tree markings. "Someday," he said, "someone will drive the same path in a clean car in one day. They'll never know what it took." But that night, they knew. They set camp behind an old windmill, cracked blades spinning slowly. The moon was full. The wind whispered across the grass. And then it came again. The noise. Not loud this time, but there. Grinding. Fast. Then stopping suddenly. Caleb jumped up. "That's it. That's what I heard before." Henry grabbed a lantern and stepped out into the dark. The light showed nothing but tall grass and empty land. Then in the dirt, tire tracks. Not theirs. Fresh. "No one else is supposed to be out here," Jennings muttered. Henry didn't respond. He followed the tracks for a few yards, then stopped. There, stuck into a small tree trunk, was a rusted railroad spike, hammered in sideways, like a mark. Henry pulled it out and stared at it. Why was it there? Who put it in the middle of nowhere? And why were they following? The next morning, they pushed harder. They crossed rivers on wooden planks. They passed dead cows, dried up ponds, and birds flying in the wrong direction. And still no town. But just before sunset, a small flag appeared in the distance. Red, white, blue. They rolled closer. It was nailed to a wooden post with the words, "Lincoln Highway marker, you are not lost." Henry laughed out loud. The first real smile in days. They had reached a checkpoint, made by another survey team. There was a box nearby. Inside were notes, food cans, and a message. To the next team. "If you're reading this, you're halfway across the prairie. Keep going. We believe in you." Jennings handed the note to Caleb, who read it twice. Henry folded it carefully and placed it in his journal. That night, under the stars, the world felt still. But before Henry fell asleep, he wrote a single line in his notebook. "We are not alone on this road, and not everyone ahead of us is friendly." The fire crackled, the wind returned, and in the distance, a lantern blinked once, then vanished. The prairie behind them was quiet now, but the mountains ahead were not. Henry turned the wheel westward, into Wyoming, where the flatlands buckled and began to rise. The car climbed slowly. The air was cooler, thinner. The sky stretched wider than it ever had before. But behind that peaceful sky, the clouds were building. They didn't talk much that morning, not after what they saw the night before. A lantern flicker in the distance. Then nothing. Henry didn't sleep. Jennings sharpened a piece of metal into a knife, and Caleb kept watching the trail behind them. "I swear something's out there," he whispered. "Something's following us." But now, the road was turning rocky. The smooth prairie trails were gone. What lay ahead were steep paths, jagged cliffs, and thin, winding passes. Their car shook with every bump. The wheels slipped on gravel, and the sound of wind howling through the canyons made it feel like the land was whispering. They passed a dead horse wagon, left upside down beside a cliff. No bodies, no tracks, just torn fabric and broken wood. "What happened here?" Caleb asked. Henry didn't answer. He just pushed the car forward, teeth clenched. By noon, the engine was overheating again. Water boiled in the tank. They had to stop near a rocky ridge to cool it. There, carved into a stone wall, was a symbol. A crooked letter L, painted in red and white. Lincoln Highway. But under it was something else, scratched deep into the stone. Turned back. Henry stared at it. It didn't look like a joke. It looked like someone left it in a hurry, with fear in their hands. That night, they found a small wooden shack, probably left by railway workers long ago. Broken windows, an old chair, and the scent of rust and dust. They decided to rest. Jennings lit a lantern. Caleb made a fire outside, and Henry opened his notebook. "The road is no longer a road," he wrote. "It's a challenge now, a dare." The mountains creaked. The wind slammed against the shack, and something, or someone, howled from far off the ridge. Henry stood up, lantern in hand, and stepped outside. He scanned the cliffs. Nothing. But when he looked down near the trail, there were footprints, big, wide apart, going uphill, away from the shack, and not made by any of them. They were too fresh, too deep, and barefoot. "You see that?" Henry called. Caleb stepped forward, eyes wide. "Those weren't here earlier." They followed the prints for a few steps, then lost them near a rock slide. That night, no one slept. Something circled the shack. They heard steps, whistles, and at one point, a knock on the wall. When they rushed out with the lantern, there was nothing, only wind and shadows that didn't move. By morning, they packed faster than ever. They didn't talk. They didn't look back. The trail climbed higher. One wrong turn, and they'd fall hundreds of feet down. But just as the cliffs grew steeper, a miracle appeared. A wooden archway built into the rock, handmade, carved with letters. "You made it." Behind it, a narrow but stable downhill path led into the western valley. They were crossing the spine of the country, from east to west. Henry stepped out and touched the wooden arch. "This is the line," he said, "from the old world into the new." But as they rolled forward, Caleb turned around and stared up at the cliffs. Something moved. Just for a second, a tall shape, standing still between two stones. It didn't wave. It didn't run. It just watched. Then it was gone. Caleb didn't say anything. Not yet. He just sat back in the car and whispered to himself, "We're not alone. Not in these mountains. And maybe we never were." The road finally bent downward, but that didn't mean it got easier. Sometimes the hardest part is holding on. They had crossed Wyoming's teeth, but now in Utah, the road turned cruel. Gone were the soft plains and endless skies. Ahead lay sharp canyons, tight curves, and cliffs so high they erased the wind. The Lincoln Highway didn't exist here yet. Not in this part. Only loose gravel, goat paths, and ancient native trails that twisted around rocks like snakes. The car wobbled dangerously. One front wheel shook every time they hit a slope. Henry had tied it with rope. Twice. "We need to stop and fix it," Jennings warned. "We can't," Henry said. "The canyon floor is too narrow. We stop, we fall." The road curved around a gorge so deep, Caleb threw a rock just to hear it land. It never did. They moved like ghosts between stone walls. The sun disappeared behind rock towers. Their shadows stretched longer than the car itself. At one sharp turn, the cliff edge gave way. Dust shot into the air. The left rear tire was dangling. Jennings jumped out and threw a rock under it. Caleb dropped on his stomach, grabbing the axle. Henry didn't move, didn't blink. He just held the brake with one boot and muttered, "Don't let it slip. If it goes, we all go." For 10 silent minutes, they shifted weight, used rope, jammed rocks, until finally, the wheel caught dirt again. The car rolled forward slowly and stopped on a flat patch. They all sat in silence. No one said it out loud, but the road had almost taken them. Later that night, they found an old cave cut into the canyon wall. It wasn't man-made, just shelter from the wind. They lit a fire, ate dried meat, and stared into the flames. Jennings whispered what they all feared. "We won't make it to California, not like this." But Henry didn't reply. He just stared at the notebook in his lap. His pencil moved slowly. They said it couldn't be done. They said we'd turn back. But this road, it's not just about us. It's for someone we'll never meet. The fire cracked. Then they heard it again. A whistle. Far. Soft. But not the wind. Caleb stood up. "That's the same sound we heard in Nebraska." Jennings grabbed the hammer they used for fixing bolts. Henry picked up the lantern. They stepped outside the cave, but saw nothing. Only moonlight and a long, thin path carved into the canyon wall ahead. The next morning, as they followed that path, they saw something no one expected. A bridge, half-built, wooden, shaky, but it stretched across a canyon gap like a hand reaching through the sky. It wasn't marked on any map. No town nearby. No signs of who built it. But nailed to a post on one side was a note, burned on the edges, written in black ink. If you made it this far, you deserve to cross. But not all things that follow are your friends. The West holds secrets. They stood still. Then Henry looked across the canyon and said, "We're driving it." "Are you insane?" Jennings snapped. "It'll collapse." "Then we keep moving." And they did. Slowly. 1 foot at a time. The car creaked over the wooden beams. Boards groaned. A nail popped. Caleb looked down. Nothing but air. But they kept going. 3 wheels on. Then 4. Until finally, they reached the other side. The bridge groaned behind them. Then collapsed into the canyon. Gone. Forever. They didn't speak. They didn't cheer. They just sat still breathing. Henry pulled out his notebook and wrote, "There's no turning back now. The road must be finished, even if we vanish before it is." And far behind them, on the opposite cliff, a shape stood silently. The bridge was gone, but they were still moving. California was near. The sun felt warmer. The sky opened wider. And somewhere, over the hills and through the trees, was the ocean. But between them and the coast stood the redwood forest. The trees rose like giants. Thick trunks, green shadows, a silence so deep the car's engine felt like a shout in a church. They entered quietly. The trail now was barely wide enough for the wheels. Sunlight only reached the ground in pieces. "Feels like we're driving through history," Caleb whispered. "Like something's watching us." Jennings looked around. "Yeah, but it ain't friendly." They followed the old trail, twisted, narrow, broken by roots. And then they saw it. A sign nailed to a fallen tree. "Turn around, no highway here." But it was too late. They had come too far. Henry pressed forward. "The only way out is forward," he said. But even he was starting to feel it. The way the trees leaned in. The way sound died after a few feet. The way the wind moved without warning. That night, they found a flat patch near a stream. They set up camp, lit a small fire, and ate in silence. Then they saw the second sign, nailed to a tree nearby. "You're not alone in these woods." The fire cracked. The wind blew. And deep between the trees, something moved. A flicker. A light. A figure. Gone in a blink. Jennings stood up, gripping his wrench. "That's not an animal." Henry held the lantern up. The trees stood still. But behind them, smoke began to rise. Not from their fire. From another one. Further down the trail. Glowing orange between the trunks. They rushed to the car. Started the engine. Rolled out fast. The fire chased them. Wild, fast, hungry. Ash rained down. Branches fell across the trail. Smoke blinded their way. Henry kept shouting, "Don't stop. Keep moving. The trees are falling." They dodged through the smoke. Jennings leaning out, clearing limbs with his wrench. Caleb coughing, covering his mouth with cloth. The forest roared behind them. The flames reached into the sky. And then, light, not fire, sunlight. They broke out of the trees. Dust flew from the tires. The car skidded to a stop at the edge of a hill. Below them was the Pacific Ocean, blue wide still. They had made it. Almost. But the fire still raged behind them, black smoke reaching into the air like a warning. Caleb sat down on the ground, face covered in ash, eyes wide. Why did someone like that? Why lead us and then trap us? No one had answers, but Henry pulled a charred piece of wood from the car grill. Burned into it was a symbol, a railroad spike, the same kind they saw back in Nebraska and Wyoming. He held it in his hand and said quietly, "Someone doesn't want this road to exist." Jennings wiped his face. "Too bad. We're almost there. Whoever they are, they're too late." Henry looked down the hill. Just a few miles now. San Francisco waited at the shore. The road was almost real. But one final chapter remained. The trees were behind them, the smoke still rising, but the road was clear now. Ahead, A soft slope led down into the city of San Francisco. The ocean sparkled in the distance, blue, calm, wide. And above it all, the sun was setting, glowing gold. Henry didn't say anything. He just kept driving. Quiet, focused. The car rattled and wheezed, but it moved. Jennings and Caleb sat in the back. Dirty, tired, worn down to the bone. But their eyes were full. "That's it," Caleb whispered. "That's the Pacific. That's the end," Jennings said softly. But Henry shook his head. "No, that's the beginning." The Lincoln Highway was not a line on a map yet. Not paved, not painted, but it was real. Because they had driven it. They rolled through the edges of the city, past horses, trams, curious people. Their car, covered in dust, ropes, and smoke stains, looked like it came from another world. And in some ways it had. But just as they neared the beach, a group of men blocked the road. Black suits, badges, no smiles. "You're not cleared to finish this journey," one man said. Henry stepped out. "We came from New York. We built this road mile by mile. You're not stopping us now." The lead man held up a paper. Official stamp. Some government seal. "This land is being reserved for rail expansion. There is no road here." Jennings stepped forward. "We just crossed deserts, rivers, cliffs, and fire to get here. And now you say it doesn't count." The man said nothing. Then the crowd began to grow. Locals, shopkeepers, travelers, people who had heard of this crazy car coming across the country. Some had seen it in Iowa. Some remembered the stories from Wyoming. Some watched it crawl out of the forest the night before. And now they all stood behind it. "Let them through," someone shouted. "That's the Lincoln car." They made it. The suits looked nervous. Then the lead man folded the paper and stepped aside. "Fine, but no ceremony, no newspapers, no noise." Henry nodded once. No smile, just determination. The car rolled forward, down the last hill, onto the sand. The wheels hit the edge of the sea and stopped. Henry stepped out, walked into the water, boots soaked, eyes on the sunset. He pulled out the wooden stake he'd carried since Indiana, carved the word "finish" into it, and planted it in the sand. "There," he said. "Now the road has touched the ocean." Caleb looked out at the water. "Do you think people will remember this?" Henry nodded slowly. "Maybe not our names, but one day, someone will drive from New York to San Francisco in 2 days, eating sandwiches, listening to music, and they'll never know it all started with 3 men, 1 car, and a dream that nearly died in the mountains." Behind them, the crowd clapped softly. The sky turned orange. The Pacific breeze carried the sound of waves and something else. For a moment, Henry thought he heard it again. That whistle, that hum, that shadow that had followed them all the way. But it faded. Gone. Maybe it was never meant to be explained. Some stories aren't warnings. They're just reminders that every road worth building is built with risk. And on that beach, before Route 66, before the interstates, the first American road had found its end and its beginning.